out there in the digital world. So I really appreciate the warm welcome, Jody. I really appreciate the SBC team. So how is everyone doing today? Please, I would love to hear in the chat. And welcome to the Strategic Vision Conference. We are back again after last year's inaugural event. Strategic Vision Conference has put together a global event with speakers from around the world, including China, Brazil, some Europeans are in the house, as well as speakers from across our own United States. As you know by now, my name is Celeste Hartwell, and I'm going to be your host for the day. As usual, we have a stellar lineup of executives discussing the acquisition of iconic brands, marketing, as well as how COVID has and continues to impact education. We have not one, not two, but three keynote speakers. Oh my God, are we in store for an amazing day? So I strongly suggest you grab your pen, paper, or your favorite app to take notes, and let's get started. So to begin the day, it is time for our business breakfast. To kick us off, our first panel is titled Superfoods That Boost Health and Where They Originate. I know you've heard you are what you eat, and it's not only funny to read on t-shirts, but it is true. As a result of needing to eat daily for the rest of our lives, the global food business is worth trillions. Food's continual demand puts a huge strain on our planet's resources in a world where profit is held in higher regard than the sanctity of food. That can be a huge problem. It creates an imbalance which tips the scale toward profit. This dichotomy forces large-scale farmers, manufacturers, packaging companies, and scientists to tamper with the integrity of food. It is time to learn more about nature's natural boosters. Welcome, Fernanda.
Hi, and welcome everyone to this great panel. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for attending at this conference. I am Fernanda Matta, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion. I am a proud Brazilian, PhD in natural ingredients from the University of Surrey in the UK. I'm now working with innovation in one of the leading superfood companies in Brazil, Pura Vida, and I'm also a specialist in developing sustainable food value chain. Now, I'd like to thank Keith and Derek for this panel and start our conversation. So Derek, let's start with you. Could you introduce yourself a bit and talk about Awi Superfood?
Great, thanks Fernanda. Good morning, everybody. So I am originally from New York, but I've been living in Brazil for over 15 years. And I started out my career in actually investment banking and then ended up working in impact investing. And I got involved with social and environmental projects since my days in college. And then it became clear to me that I was ready to move on to do something different, more related to my purpose. So actually in 2002, I ended up leaving my JP Morgan job in New York City and working with an SME fund related to renewable energy and rural infrastructure with financing SMEs. We had support from the United Nations Foundation, and also we also had USAID involved. So I ended up basically moving to Brazil and looking for these different small enterprises that were doing all this amazing work. In fact, actually, I found my present co-founder, Roberto. He was actually working in bringing solar-powered water pumping systems to indigenous villages in the Xingu area of the Amazon. So I got to have these experiences with all these incredible technologies and entrepreneurs, et cetera. So anyway, that was a bit of my background. And then I ended up working back in finance for years after working in impact investing. Kind of had a sort of double life with being involved on the side with different social enterprises, environmental technologies, et cetera. Until at some point I realized that I was ready to be full-time dedicated to social environmental projects. So that was actually when I ended up founding Awi Superfoods. And we actually has missions that were related to basically we look at actually four interconnected issues. And in our view, the food system is really what, moves the planet. People are eating every day. So it's really the most critical, aspect of sustainability obviously for people and the planet. And that's, a lot inspired by Eat Forum, the research of Eat Lancet, Eat Forum. So essentially, the four issues that we specifically are looking at, we Superfoods, we call ourselves a food for good tech, which is essentially a food tech, and at the same time also social enterprise. So we're basically looking at the Amazon rainforest, the deforestation issues with that, and so the solutions there are related to basically creating a new bioeconomy. So there's all these fruits and palms, et cetera, that we're working to basically create new supply chains for all these different fruits and palms, working with cooperatives. That involves training programs for the different cooperatives. And then also we have a factory as well that we're working on renovating. So that will actually buy those products and then develop them. And we have a brand as well of Superfoods. So, and that actually goes to the next, kind of jumps to the next issue of the Superfoods. So essentially, we have a brand of sorbets, and they mix various superfoods. So the concept there is there's the whole second issue of all the diet related food crisis that we're living with. Diabetes in the U.S., for example, reaching close to 10%. Brazil, for example, is following suit. Also, obesity and overweight. These are some of the biggest problems, health problems in the world. So by creating really healthy foods, then we're looking to work on solutions to address that. And then the third one is essentially it's basically the environmental footprint of the food system. Obviously, all the carbon and the transportation, the fertilizers, the pesticides, the packaging, the effluents, all these different aspects. So what we're looking is to actually incorporate these green technologies into our supply chain. In particular, energy efficiency is a big one. We're in the cold chain, so we're working with different technologies that can help reduce the consumption of energy. And the idea is to bring that also to our partners in the supply chain. And lastly, we have the social issues. So it's all about generating income for the local farmers through the cooperatives, bringing training programs to them, et cetera. So that's kind of the nutshell for what we're envisioning doing for the food system and in the Amazon.
That's great. Very, very inspiring. Keith, let's go back to you. So could you introduce yourself a bit and talk about Producers Market?
Yes, hi, I'm Keith Agoada. It's great to be with you today. Thank you for moderating, Fernanda, and Derek. Always a pleasure to be by your side virtually and in person. So Producers Market is a company that I'm the CEO of, and Producers Market is building a digital network of agricultural producers and digitizing their storytelling as well as their validation points across the value chain, with the intention of connecting agricultural producers more closely to consumers via brand and distribution and retail partnerships. And so Producers Market is the network of producers, of which Awi is one of our 600 or so producers. And then we've created a application called Storybird, where we can actually take the storytelling and the validation across the supply chain, validation of origin, and soon we'll have validation of carbon and other impacts, and be able to communicate that to the end consumer via the QR code on packaging or a e-commerce embed. So, at our core, we're a data architecture and marketing technologies company, and we're making it easy for agricultural producers to have a digital footprint and connect more directly to markets.
That's great. That's awesome. So let's go back to Derek. Derek, what are superfoods and biomes? Could you give us some examples of products that, for example, can create new cells or keep your immune system strong?
Sure. Well, superfoods, it's a word that's getting more and more attention. But basically, they're foods that are very rich in vitamins and minerals, fibers, et cetera. So there actually a lot of things are superfoods, and people don't even really realize that they are. So just eating lots of fruits and and even in certain vegetables and whatnot. So Specifically in the Amazon, there's a few interesting ones. One of them that we're working with is this camu camu. And there's actually a lot of it in the Peruvian Amazon, and there's some as well in Brazil. And this little fruit really likes water, so it actually grows on the edges of these rivers. And the concentration of vitamin C is so high, and other antioxidants. It's like 15 times higher than the acerola berry, which is also considered to be much, much higher. So that's one that we're actually working with Embrapa, the Brazilian government, to plant some of these ones that are adapted not only for being in the river, in the very marshy areas, but also in kind of drier lands. Another interesting one is called peach palm, which it's a palm. Frequently, people know about it for palm hearts, but actually the fruit of it is traditionally used by these populations up in the Amazon, but also even through like Central America, et cetera. It's this incredible palm, and it's got all these the vitamin A, vitamin C, minerals, fibers, et cetera. So it's one of these things that, unfortunately, a lot of these traditional foods that were, in their coffee in the morning have been, people are losing these traditions and starting to eat more processed foods and stuff, but that's another one. And then there's another interesting one called sacha inchi that I might mention that's also in Peru, which has omega-3, and it's great because it's star seed. It looks actually like a star. It's incredible nut. It needs to be kind of toasted to have a better taste and whatnot, but it's got amazing properties. It grows really quickly. And there's no allergy issues like there are with other nuts. So anyway, those are a few interesting superfoods from the Amazon.
That's true. There's so many more. So I'm curious now, how did you get started? What was the inspiration, or what were you fed up with? Let's start with Keith now.
Yeah, so I started my career in the agricultural side and agricultural development, but then towards deeper into my career, I started working as a distributor and doing procurement. So putting on the buying hat and starting to go around and trying to purchase products to then export to the US with a very large company I was working for. What I was fed up with was how the smaller and mid-sized producers really were cut out of the market, that their only way to reach, premium markets, export markets was through intermediaries and other, brokers, traders, large brands in between. So I felt like the future of our food industry should be about actually valuing and supporting small and mid-sized producers, and just observing how the current system was functioning. It really put the pressure down on small and mid-sized producers to keep, prices low. But I started visualizing a model in which we could work towards making prices higher and higher by making value chains more direct and connecting consumers more directly into the products and storytelling. So it was really the kind of old guard of how our distribution models work. And this applies to the natural organic industry. It's no exception. So that's kind of, I think, what gave me the impulse to really go out and make this venture happen.
Great. What about you, Derek?
Well, it's actually a confluence of a few different things. Interestingly, years before this project had started, a British friend of mine, who at the time I didn't know was a friend of a friend, came to stay with me in Rio de Janeiro. This guy, Stu, and he basically brought a second suitcase just full of all these superfood powders. So all of a sudden, it was all these different crazy different products that I'd never heard of and whatnot. And then I guess over the next several years, he converted me. So every time I would go back to the U.S., I would bring back in my suitcase a few bags of these different powders. So that was kind of one of the backdrops of becoming a little bit of a superfood junkie. And then actually, I also I'd been working with this guy named Rick Jarrow as a mentor, and he's one of these proponents of his actually a book called Creating the Work You Love. And actually, I was involved in bringing him to Brazil, launching his book. And I would actually, in his workshops, I would be doing the translation into Portuguese. So here I was, speaking all this thing about living your life with purpose. And I was sort of living a kind of a double life, because I was in my day job. I was working with raising money for companies and turnarounds of companies, and I was also doing some stuff on the side with different investments in social and environmental technologies and companies and whatnot, but I wasn't fully aligned with it. And then, actually I went at some point to visit an acai factory up in the Amazon. And then, and I saw in Marajó Island specifically where we work, and I saw the huge potential. And it came to, at some point I realized that, wow, like all this potential, the whole Amazon bioeconomy, and here I am basically essentially being a hypocrite with respect to living fully aligned. So I saw this huge opportunity with all these different fruits and palms. I had my co-founder who had been worked with many years before, who was a guy who basically knew how to do all these rural infrastructure, and who could run a farm and a factory and all this stuff like that. So that at that point I realized that it was time in 2017 to move on and really complete my mission. So that's kind of some of my story of how I got to found Aoi Superfoods.
That's great. And in terms of environmental impact, how can these foods make a difference in preserving the Amazon rainforest and other biomes? What activities are involved in getting this new product to the market? What are the challenges? Derek, could you start with this?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's relatively straightforward. Essentially, if these different fruits and palms have value to the local river people, and if there's actually buyers of these different products, then they're not going to be incentivized to cut them down to plant maybe only acai, or to plant cassava, or to cut down the woods, because some of these fruit trees also have value as woods as well. So it's really about creating these new supply chains, and obviously that's challenging and takes time and whatnot. But some of the ways that we're doing that. So first, for example, we need to map out what the different products are in the region. Obviously, you need to have certain scale in order to be able to work with these different products. And then for example, on our farm, on our eco farm training center, we actually start to plant some of these ones. So there's a lot of these. There's various of these kind of, I've called them the forgotten palms, that are have huge amounts. So we're planting them. And then we're also working with the Brazilian government's agricultural research and development arm called Embrapa to have access to their best genetic material. Some of the challenges you may have is that sometimes, for example, there's one called bacaba, and it's actually 6 or 7 different species of bacaba. So you have actually, depending on the species, you're going to have different amounts of different nutrients. So to standardize them is challenging when you have different species. So it's about actually mapping it, starting to get some scale with your own planting, and then organizing the farmers to be planting these fruits as well, and getting the genetic material to them as well. So these are these things that takes time. There's also issues with regulatory approvals as well. So specifically, sometimes you may only be able to sell it in one state in Brazil, but not necessarily in Brazil entirely. Or if you want to start thinking about, let's say, exporting it, then you need like EPA or other regulatory approvals from other entities. So those are some of the issues involved.
Great. Keith, do you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, well, I think, Derek and what they're doing at Aoi represents a great example where they're doing the actual work to support the source and to bring to market products that will support communities, prevent deforestation, add value to local producers and farmers, create jobs in areas where there might not be opportunity. So from where we sit with our company, we see that this work and the actual plants and superfoods behind this work is actually critical in order to create the change that we want to see in our food systems. And our job is to take that story, take those marketing, take those validation points, and be able to share it across value chains, so that when a consumer goes to buy a product, they can understand the impact and the difference between buying, an Aoi sorbet versus just a standard organic sorbet that was made by a big company that may or may not have the same values and same impacts. And so what we really want to achieve is to actually take the work that's already being done, take the impacts that are already happening, and start to measure, validate, and share those data outputs to consumers, and to also support the brands, distributors, retailers domestically, internationally, downstream, to actually share and capture that value, to be able to, add brand value to their operations. And so, in short, we see superfoods as being an amazing opportunity for sustainability because of a lot of them coming from at-risk areas that can really help populations. So as Derek knows, all superfoods are not created equally. And so when there is a superfood that is super, not just in terms of health and nutritious, but super in terms of impact, that needs to be differentiated on the market, and that needs to be understood, and consumers need to know the difference. And so that's kind of where we are working with our platform, is to put on a pedestal and also to build in these validation points and storytelling points to allow brands like Awi to thrive in a global and also in a local environment.
That is so true. Thanks for what you're doing. And how important do you see traceability becoming in the next 10 years? Will buyers drive this, the legislation, or both? Are there motivation factors beyond food safety? And how important is blockchain in this movement? Keith?
Yeah. So look, I'll start with the area that I believe is most important. That's the consumer. The reason why organic bio has become such a huge movement globally is it has nothing to do with retailers or brands. It's because consumers are demanding it. And if consumers start to vote with their dollars and start buying from retailers or buying from restaurants or buying online direct from producers that have organic, then it will change the industry. And that's why organic has become a massive movement globally and continues to grow. I see traceability as very similar to organic, where consumers, the more that they learn about the impacts of their consumption, how they can actually do something great and actually celebrate what they're doing by just buying the right products, that, traceability will become very mainstream. And it'll be a question of, if you're buying a premium product, consumers will say, well, this one has traceability. This one shows me that it's actually from this origin. So it actually is organic, or it's actually from this part of Brazil where they grow the acai. And then there's also the validation. So if consumers care about what is the carbon impact, the social impact, economic impact, that, well, maybe one has traceability to validate those items, I believe that it will become a mainstream kind of bar to come over, just like organic is for groups that don't use chemicals that fit the organic framework. They get an organic certification. I think the same thing will happen with traceability, that the groups that have something wonderful to show will have traceability to show it. And that will put a spotlight on the groups that aren't showing it, because then the consumers will start to wonder, well, if Awi is showing where all their ingredients come from and what their impacts are, why doesn't this other brand do that? And I think that's really going to be the greatest driver of traceability, is the consumers. Where I see legislation coming in is in places like Europe, impact on small farmers and making sure there's no child labor or slave labor in cacao plantations, for example, or if it's oil palm, that they aren't cutting down, rainforests where orangutans live. This is driving it from an actual legislative, but I believe carbon is going to be the big driver, that there's going to be demands to brands and retailers and companies to actually validate what their carbon impacts are beyond a theoretical number, but into practical data. And the way to get practical data on carbon impacts is to actually trace and track those value chains. So that's where I see the biggest drivers. And then, of course, there will be brands who are first movers like Awi and others. But then in terms of blockchain, I see it as a tool. And blockchain may or may not be required in a lot of value chains, but it holds the opportunity for a more decentralized model for how we can validate different points, whether it's provenance points, or it's points for validating transactions or movements of money. There's a lot of areas where blockchain can come in and provide an immutable ledger and a decentralized distributive format in order to validate different aspects of a value chain or of a supply chain model. So I think blockchain will be very important. I don't think it's going to be the driver. I think it's a tool that will be used and will spread across a lot of supply chains globally.
Let me just compliment one thing. It was interesting. I just saw actually yesterday, I received this JBS, obviously probably I think the biggest meat company in the world. They just announced this, besides their I think billion reais fund for the Amazon, but basically within that whole initiative is exactly a whole blockchain-based traceability of all the cattle farmers. There are 30,000 farms that they get their cattle from, and all the tracing of all that. So I mean, I'm not opining on the program itself, but here's the largest meat company in the world under huge pressure for sustainability, deforestation, et cetera. And they, obviously with all their resources and being such a big business, all the pressure from the supermarket chains in Europe and US and consumers and whatnot and government entities, they just, are launching this giant, program to do that. So I think it's as you were saying, Keith, there's companies that are using it, proactively for their differentiating how good they are and what positive impact they have, regenerative. And then there's others that are doing it as they need to because they need to mitigate the potential environmental impact, degenerative impact of their supply chain. So
great. I totally agree with you. I think traceability will be a huge thing in the next few years, and then we only just need to think about how to make these affordable for small producers as well. And what about these social aspects? Is this basically about paying a fair price to the farmers, Derek?
Well, I think the olds. Well, I don't want to be critical of fair trade. I think obviously fair trade is incredible work they've done, but it's at least from what I've studied, we don't have a fair trade seal, but from the studies I do, fair trade looks mainly at, are you paying at least like a 5 to 10% premium above, the standard market price? And I think that obviously that's great start, but maybe the analogy is, that's fair trade is kind of sustainability. And then, we're looking sort of to the evolution of sustainability, which is, is more kind of regenerative, trying to generate positive impact. So in our mind, beyond price, it's about figuring out ways to train the farmers. So, to make sure that they're getting the right technical assistance. A lot of these, in Brazil, for example, there are government programs or whatnot, but sometimes it doesn't reach the guys. Maybe they don't have maybe we can partner up with the government training guys and help get the kind of the more cutting edge regenerative agroforestry systems to them. We can get them the right, let's say, seedlings and seeds of the better genetic material. That's, there's other inputs that they need. This also can be done through, we can use grants as well. We call that, blended finance, where we actually will go out and look for financing to help basically pay for the training of these different farmers and helping them. So, to us, it's about basically helping them generate more income, helping them be able to guarantee the off-taking of their products, helping them be able to sell other products besides the most common ones. In our case, we're talking about, let's say, acai and maybe some Brazil nuts, but there's all these other ones as well. So we see, this kind of more holistic model, how we can bring other solutions to them. Maybe we can help them with, access to some technologies that will help them, let's say, from like solar lanterns, simple stuff. Can we work on getting them, electric motors for their different boats and stuff? So, for us, it's a more holistic vision beyond just paying a fair or a better than fair price to the farmers.
Keith, do you want to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, for us as a company, the social impact is central because ultimately it's people who are managing the land and water and our food. And if we want to make the impacts we need to do with carbon and water and ecosystems, then we have to impact people. So I believe that, central to the mission of creating change in supply chains is to focus on the people who are going to be beneficiaries of this supply chain, and ultimately trying to create a model where the small farmers, farm workers, added value processors, that they can make good wages for their work. And so it doesn't have to be the case where there could be, again, superfoods or highly nutritious products that don't, or even ecological products that don't impact people in the right way. So I think it's really important that, you know, the carbon discussion, which is of course really big right now with COP coming up in Glasgow, and then with the overall ecological deforestation, topics that are coming to the surface, that we don't forget people and the social impact components of it, because without that, it's going to be one-sided, and we need to have this be a holistic solution if we want it to scale, and if we want to promote more people to get into this industry of doing ecological regenerative agriculture or wild harvesting and these types of activities.
Yeah, and complementing what Keith said, so absolutely. So and we have to understand that these people at the end of the day are the they need to be they are already, or they need to be the guardians of these lands. They've been living there. They are the ones that know the local ecosystem. They're the ones that coexist with the flora and the fauna and stuff like that. So we need to sometimes we can be critical of of these people, but and where we're maybe in our urban lives consuming different things, generating and these people are in a lot of these cases are in in somewhat survival mode. So maybe they're hunting the different animals that are there because they need the food, and they or they're cutting down the trees because they need to make an income and stuff. So I think we need to really help them be comfortable, obviously with the kind of maybe the hierarchy of needs model, that if these people are not comfortable in survival and with all their basic needs met, they're not going to be overly concerned with cutting down one of these trees if that's what they need to put food on their table. So I think those are the social issues are completely connected, and we need to find ways, maybe innovative ways, of how can we maybe beyond, there's new models we've been thinking about, some about like maybe the farmers own they own maybe a piece of our company or they own a piece of the factory, and then how do you get them involved, where joint ventures with them where they're not only the suppliers as well, but they're also actually more aligned and with the companies as well. So I think these are these future models that are going to be developed as well.
Great. And what is regenerative to you? Do you think it's actually possible to have net positive impact? Or how do you escape the carbon from transport and plastics? Are companies just using this for marketing, Derek?
Well, there's somebody who I suggest that people do a little bit of research on. This guy's name is Daniel Wall. I think it's Wahl. And he uses this 3 horizons approach, which he didn't create, but he uses as one of his models. And it's very interesting because you look at these kind of 3 curves. You have this kind of business as usual curve where basically the innovation protects the kind of the business as usual. Then you have another a second curve, which is like innovation towards in the direction of improvement of a viable future. And then you have another realm of possibilities, which is basically this, this viable world, let's say a more regenerative world. And it's not that we have only one or the other, but it's more about, what percent, which ones are dominating. They all kind of coexist, but let's say the viable world is dominating. That would be the kind of the future that we want to have. So the point is that these things take time, and there's a transition that's happening. So a lot of times, we have certain raw materials that we use, and they come wrapped in plastic. So there's not much we can do. And initially, obviously, there's certain. So what I would say that what most matters is, I think companies that have this vision of becoming regenerative, and they're working with clear targets in that transition. So it's kind of that other expression, perfect is the enemy of good, right? So we don't have all the solutions today. So we have to accept that, and we have to say, we're doing our best, and we're continually, progressing over time. And by, and obviously a lot of these companies have your targets by 2030, by 2040, et cetera, you're going to reach this and that. So I think those are the key issues. I think regenerative is becoming a fad word that everybody is kind of using, and some companies may kind of just be saying that because it's good marketing and whatnot. But I think that's kind of the way things always work, even with sustainable as well. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that.
Keith, what about you?
Yeah, so for me, regenerative is a term that I think is being used commonly, and ideally it will have clarity to what it means to consumers, so that the word doesn't become amorphous for people. But the way I look at regenerative is that it's making a net positive impact, in a holistic way. So looking at soil health, water health, social health, community health, that regenerative is holistic by nature, and that the practices that are going into the actual agricultural activities are having this net positive benefit. And it seems like so much of the regenerative work is around soil and soil health, and looking at soil as our ultimate solution to steer humanity in a different direction with value chains and carbon impacts. So I'd say that regenerative is still being defined, but I look at it as a net impact model specific to agriculture. I know regenerative can be used in other frameworks outside of farming, but that's how I think myself and my team are looking at it.
Yeah, and I think, as Keith said, it started with the big regenerative agriculture. Now it is branching out to other aspects, and then we're also seeing different certifications starting to emerge as well. So it's got to be measured, and there's got to be methodologies to give people more credibility, as opposed to just throwing out saying, we're the only regenerative company that does this and that. So,
yeah, as you said, we are learning how to do this. So it's better than nothing, right? And at the end of the day, who is most driving this transformation towards healthy food for a healthy planet? Is it the consumers? Is it the buyers in the supermarkets, the company developing the products, or the influencers and celebrities? Keith, you want to start with this?
Yeah, it's definitely a cultural shift, but I believe it's the entrepreneurs who are out there working with the farmers and working with the supply chains in order to bring to market products that kind of fulfill the shared values that the consumers have. And then, the consumers are obviously driving it, because they're the ones who actually buy the products and are willing to pay a premium for products that have, positive externalities or perhaps, less negative impacts. But ultimately, again, if the farmers and wild harvesters and farm workers, if they're not out there doing the work, then, we're going to be eating an industrial system, diet, which is what I think we're all trying to get away from. So I believe that it's hard to silo and say it's one or the other that's driving this. I feel like it's a total shift in human consciousness, where it's just like becoming obvious that we need to move in this direction. And then the question is, how fast can we move? And I think there's, what's consistent with the last 100 years of humanity, it's business that drives it, 100 years plus. And so I think it's the entrepreneurs in business who see this as a opportunity to make money in the right way that is ultimately going to drive this forward, whether it's big companies coming in later. But I think as always, it's the smaller startups and small and mid-sized groups that come in and take the first kind of market share and start to drive this new industry, and then the larger players come in after.
Great. Derek?
I agree. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's an ecosystem. So all these different, stakeholders are moving, to make this happen in collaboration. I think one of Keith's last point about the entrepreneurs, I think they certainly have a big, because I think if they can create products that make sense for the consumers, then, the consumers then will consume them. Of course, even look at an event like today, right? That we're able to voice this, these possibilities, we're helping to create this, this consciousness. These ideas are more and more becoming disseminated, and that's how we get this transformation to continue. So, it's happening, and as you know, it's just a question of time, and making products that have the right, that are affordable, that have the right nutritional properties, that taste good, and the marketing, and getting people to buy in and change the cultural value, so that people do value these products, so that they are able to gain market share, and then basically convince the bigger guys that they need to do this. They need to buy, or they're going to buy the smaller companies, or they're going to launch their own products that partner with these other companies and move in this direction. So yeah.
And who are the other key stakeholders involved in here, such as government, banks, universities, and what are their roles? And also, how are they critical towards creating this ecosystem capable of scaling this initiative?
Wow. That's a really great question. And I don't think there's a simple answer to that, because as Derek says, it's an ecosystem model. And so, for example, if you're a producer and you actually have a market, you want to sell to them, but then how do you actually get the product to them? There's logistics, and then there's payment terms. So maybe you send the product today, but you don't get paid for 30 or 60 days. And so trade finance and financial issues, logistics issues, insurance, there needs to be entire shifts of industry in order to start supporting these new models of production and added value processing, and to support the brands, like Aoi, who are going out there, getting on the ground in creating these new models of supply chain. That it needs to be more than just, let's just say, the core stakeholders of who's adding physical value, whether it's like growers, processors, shippers, retailer, getting all the way to the consumer. But then there's all these added value services that need to shift as well to adapt themselves and evolve into these models that are going to make financing more available, that are going to add premiums or some types of economic credits or benefits in order to shift practices that are good for humanity. So there needs to be a shift that includes the legislative, the banking sectors, the insurance, and then of course all the key stakeholders across the value chain. So it's not going to be overnight, and I believe it'll be a transitioning process where it's going to be like good, and then better than good, and then great, and then it could take decades to become that ideal scenario on supply chains. So I think it's just going to be getting alignment across, all, direct stakeholders, and then the, added value suppliers and added value service providers.
Well, let me take a crack at that from a practical example. We haven't announced it yet, but we are working on a program together with a couple of NGOs, and the NGO is the entity that is basically receiving a grant from a foundation related to one of the big government companies, and it's a 3-year program, a little over $1 million, and basically there's money for us to train these different cooperatives in teaching them regenerative agroforestry and actually regenerating certain lands, which actually then the carbon for those reforestation actually goes back to this government corporation, I guess, as I imagine, as some kind of carbon or ESG, but maybe even they can the carbon for the reforesting. So through this program, then our company's farm is like the training center. So we're supplying the seedlings. We're supplying the training, part of the training, together with the two NGOs, and then we're involving youth as well, and bringing some of these models into the local schools to teach them about what's going on. But then of course it's involving let's say grant capital. In this case, it happens to be related to government, NGO sector as well, nonprofit sector, and for us it actually helps us to strengthen the supply chains And then these farmers who are going to be planting these different these agroforestry systems, regenerating their soil, then they're going to actually they can be our suppliers. We're getting closer and closer to them. So the factory that we're renovating, then the idea is that we'll be able to offtake their production as well. So these are, I think, a good example of the different components coming together. Not exactly related to this project, but we're also, as I mentioned earlier, we're working with Embrapa, the Brazilian government R&D agency, to basically test these agroforestry systems using some of these fruits, superfoods. For example, I mentioned the camu camu and the peach palm as well, and the bacaba as well. So we're going to be testing those using their genetic bank. So as we start to develop these agroforestry systems, then we can then take those to those same farmers and then start to scale them up as well. So there again, we're involving government. We also have a partnership. I'll give you another example with the Federal Institute of Para, basically the local a federal university, and also they have let's say technical programs as well. So we receive the students as well. And then we're also partnering up with another university, the Rural Agricultural University as well, to receive students on our farm as well. And that actually, we're working on a scholarship which is being paid for by the Ministry of Agriculture of the federal government. So all these different pieces come together. That's, I think, these are the kind of models that we need to collaborate and put different stakeholders together, because we need all the different resources to be able to overcome the different challenges and get scale and to pay for the costs of creating these new models, right? The traditional models have been around forever. They've been receiving a lot of these subsidies, and they have the infrastructure in place. So now we need these different support, and there are lots of resources available. I think everybody who knows that it's, if you have good projects and you have good management and whatnot, there are lots of resources available out for these projects that have very positive social and environmental impact.
That's great. I think we are running out of time here, so I'll open to you if you have any final thoughts about this beautiful conversation that we had. Derek?
Well, I think maybe just strategic vision. So I think maybe I'll take advantage of the title of the conference, right? So I think it all starts with vision, right? I mean, that's we have these visions, and then the challenge is having to sustain them, having to put the roots beneath them so that they can materialize. And and sometimes if the visions are when you're a little bit too far forward, then sometimes you have challenges because the world doesn't always it's not always ready for what you want to do, and the challenges of communicating and getting I think the marketing is really important for people to really understand, and those are the challenges that a lot of these companies face. So maybe that's what I'd share with everybody. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith?
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on Derek's thoughts, the idea of a vision is it should be inspiring, and it should be beyond what we currently know and understand today and what we realize in our day-to-day. And I believe that creating forums like this to be able to share visions, whether it's Derek and I or the other esteemed panelists and sessions, to get that word out there and to connect it with as many people as possible so that we can together scale up this new form of economy and new form of ecological and social welfare that will be based around these values and practices of regeneration and regenerative business. And so it's great to be here and really inspired, as always, listening to Derek, and I look forward to learning more about the other participants.
Thank you so much, and again, thank you all for attending here to this panel, and I hope you all have a great conference. Thank you.